speaker. Thumbs up when everybody's in. We in? Okay. Good afternoon and welcome. This is session 2 for the cycle of parenting. This is parent to parent, real talk from real thrivers. This is brought to you by the National American Indian and Alaska Native Childhood Trauma TSA Category 2 Center. We are funded by SAMHSA, and we are part of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. We are housed at the University of Iowa in Iowa, College of Public Health. Next slide, please. All right, so we are, again, the National American Indian and Alaska Native Childhood Trauma Center, and we are funded by a grant through SAMHSA. We have to say that the content of this event is the creation of the presenters and does not reflect the views and the policies or opinions of SAMHSA, HHS, and the American Alaska Native NCTSN. And next slide, please. I'm going to give you a few minutes just to look over our land acknowledgement. This was developed by 3 of our co-workers, Ella Driscoll, who is Meskwaki, Keely Driscoll, who is Meskwaki, and Sean Bear, who is also Meskwaki. And next slide, please. After today's event, you will be receiving the slide presentation, presentations of the slide, and any resources or anything that we have, and the chat box. You will also be receiving a survey. We'll also at the end of today's presentation put the survey into the chat box. Please take just a minute to fill out the survey. It just allows us and the speakers today know how we're doing, what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong. Next slide, please. So my name is Teresa Brewington. I work here at the Native Center for Behavioral Health. I am the co-director of the National American Indian and Alaska Native Mental Health Technology Transfer Center K through 12, and the co-director for the National American Indian and Alaska Native Child Traumatic Stress Initiative Category 2. I'm an enrolled member of the Coharie tribe and a descendant of the Lumbee tribe. I have a master's in educational leadership, a master's in business administration. I live here on the Meskwaki settlement with my husband and my granddaughter. And I'm just happy to be here today, and I really look forward to today's presentation. If you were not here last week, please make sure to check out our website or email us, and we will send you a copy of the session from last week. It was very beautiful and very powerful, and I do know that the day is even going to be better. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to my coworker, Liz.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Sadoff. I'm the program coordinator for the National American Indian and Alaska Native Childhood Trauma TSA. I recently graduated from the College of Public Health here at the University of Iowa in Community and Behavioral Health, and I also am a certified health education specialist. And I am going to introduce our GRA, Eleanor. Eleanor's our GRA. Oh, you can introduce yourself?
Hi there, my name is Eleanor Witt. I'm currently pursuing a master's degree at the University of Iowa in school counseling. I have a bachelor's degree in music education from Central College, and I get to work with these 2 lovely ladies on the trauma grant, and I'm excited to have you all here today.
And with that, we are going to have Ronnie introduce himself.
Good afternoon, Hamadowe. My name is Ronald Wakini. I am half Comanche and half not. I am the Associate Director of the Oklahoma Association on Problem Gambling and Gaming in Norman, Oklahoma. And I'm just happy to be here and hope to share some wisdom with everybody today. Thank you.
Stina,
Good afternoon, everybody. Hami Takuyape. My name is Lesbina Saul Merdasi. My Dakota name is Tate Ojajawi. It means shining light winged woman. And I'm very happy to be here today. I currently work as a behavioral health counselor at Nebraska Urban Indian Health Coalition. And I also work as a project coordinator for Project Beacon, which addresses sex trafficking and human trafficking in Indian country. And I am currently based out of Omaha, Nebraska. Nice to meet everybody. Ronaldo.
Hello, I'm Raquel Ramos, and I work for the National Indian Education Association. I am their prevention specialist, and my former background and current background is prevention of substance use, suicide prevention, as well as just stuff. I lost my train of thought. I love working in the field of prevention, and I love working with youth and young adults. That's my forte there. Thank you.
Cynthia?
Hello, everyone. My name is Cynthia. I am an enrolled member of the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas. I am also Muskogee Creek from Oklahoma. I have 3 biological kids. I take care of my nephew as well, more recently. I work at an intertribal treatment center. I am provisionally licensed as a drug and alcohol counselor. And my current position is with Project Beacon. I am the case manager / victim advocate working with the Indigenous community who's experienced sex trafficking. And with that, I'll pass.
Aho, Nadeshi Kiskichi. Hello, I'm Melanie Johnson. I am the director of the Whole Child Initiative with the National Indian Education Association. I also hold a certified prevention specialist certification. I've been working in Indian country, since my early 20s. This is probably the best time in my career, and I just want to say thank you all for joining us again today, and I will pass it on to the next person.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ronaldo Tomorito. I am Dene. My clans are Nashusha Dene on my father's side and Hushkushni Mud on my mother's side. I grew up on the reservation and have been currently an advocate for Native American children with disabilities, but also an education consultant. I work in various areas of mentoring and helping parents understand their rights and how to be these parents that are involved within their schools, their community, and with their children. I also do healing circles to look at how to combat bring back the balance into education. But I'm really grateful to be here, and I thank each and everyone for taking the time to come and listen, and I'm just thankful. Thank you.
So as we move into our next session, this is actually a series that's broken up into parts that can stand on its own, as well as a series. So our first session was deconstructing the years that made us, which was the Friday session of last week. And then this Friday session is the cycle of parenting, and the following are looking inward and breaking the cycle. I also am about to add the registration links for the next 2 sessions so that you can all join and register through the meeting. You'll also receive an ad through the listserv. So the overall goal of this series is to acknowledge the past, present, and future and strengths of Native parents as we come together to encourage all Native parents to do the same, to heal collectively and break the cycle. We brought all of these panelists came together and brought their wonderful ideas and their stories, as well as their strength in how they have become parents, been parents, and been parented. So I really look forward to all of you hearing their stories. So with that, I am going to start it with our first speaker, which is Ronnie.
Good afternoon, everyone. There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Hamadowe. I just like to say thank you for allowing me to share some of my story today and discuss the cycle of parenting, how I was parented, and how that in turn affected the way that I parented previously. And then next week, I'm saving a little bit of more detail and going into current parenting and grandparenting next week. So with that being said, we will go ahead and get started. And Liz, can we advance? Now, when I introduced myself, and I have a bad habit of doing this, and it's just kind of been that way for a long time as I do speaking engagements everywhere, I always introduce myself as half Comanche and half not. Now, on the left here is a blank photo of my biological father. I never met him. I didn't see a picture until about 3 years ago. So when I talk about my not side, that's the not side. I had no idea. I knew a name, and that was all I knew as I was growing up. I was a teenage pregnancy. My mom was a senior in high school when she had just graduated. I'd been through 2 graduations, my mom's and my own. And she was a teen, I was a teen pregnancy. So I was really, not planned, but I grew up primarily with my grandmother raising me, and that's her picture in the background. And that is my youngest, no, that's my oldest son, Aaron. And on the right, that's his picture right there. And he's in the 2 pictures in the center. And on to the right, I actually have 2 biological children, Travis, his younger brother. There's not any pictures of Travis. Their mother and I, and I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit, their mother and I were divorced when Aaron was about 2, maybe 3 and a half, and his younger brother Travis was just a baby. He was maybe 14, 16 months old when we got a divorce. So let's go ahead and advance the slide just one, and we'll get into a little bit more detail here, Liz. Thank you. I graduated from Elgin High School in 1981, just by sheer luck, because not because I didn't have the educational, I was okay. I was a good student. I just didn't have the motivation to stay there. So I got into trouble quite a bit. Now, if we backtrack just a little bit, research and statistics state that parents who are involved with their children, specifically the male, the father, if the father is involved with the child throughout their developmental years, they have a better chance of success going forward. They have a nice, healthy role model to base things off of. I didn't have that. So I was just kind of lost and just had to figure things out on my own. I met my first wife in 1985, and we were married shortly after. Aaron, whose picture was on the first slide, was born in 1988. His younger brother, Travis, was born in 1991. And there you go, see in my timeline, we were divorced in 1992. So Travis was just a little over a year old. I always dabbled in illegal substances my whole life, and it became pretty prevalent in my developmental years as a teenager. I was introduced to weed, marijuana, alcohol, and without a good healthy fatherly figure to show me role models, it kind of consumed my life. And I rode that train as far as I could possibly ride it. In 1999, I received my first felony conviction, possession of CDS, methamphetamine. That was my end all be all, was methamphetamine. And upon my release, I was at the dope man's house within 15 minutes after I got out of jail on that first felony conviction. Let me talk a little bit about recovery here for those that may be experiencing issues in their family with alcohol and drugs. The jail cell as a magical place. It has the unique ability to instill priorities in one's life. While they're sitting in that jail cell, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience and watching others, everything is prioritized. We know what we're supposed to do, where we're supposed to do it, when we're supposed to do it. I miss basketball games. I'm feeling all depressed and sad, and oh, you know, I'm missing Little League basketball games I should be at there. And then the minute that jail cell door opened up, and 15 minutes later, where was I at? Back at the dope house. My priorities went way out the door once again. Not more than 2 years later, a year and a half later, I received my second felony conviction, trafficking in illegal drugs, and I was sentenced to 15 years in the Department of Corrections. Next slide, Liz. This lady is my wife, Shauna. We were married about 12, 13 years ago. So I met her right about 2 or 3 years after I got out of prison. And I include her in this because through her, I have 4 stepdaughters, and that's where I became the father that I knew I could be with the young girls. And we'll see a picture of everybody again at the end. But this is where my parenting started to take its turn. When I knew having these young girls look at me with as their father, I had to act right and be right. So next slide, Liz. This slide, I had an honest conversation with the Creator in God back when I was arrested. I love this line from Crocodile Dundee when he's talking about, yeah, I read the Bible once, me and God, we be mates. I'm like, okay, very cool. So I had my honest conversation with God, and I told him, I said, you know, my own decisions got me here, and I could potentially be incarcerated for 15 years. And I know there's a better way. So what way is that? So I became honest with myself. And at this point, I used to say I would do anything for my kids. I would not do what my father did to me. I will not leave my children fatherless. And guess what I did? I got arrested. I got sentenced to 15 years. So I left my children fatherless. I divorced their mother. I left my youngest son, and I don't have a relationship with him even to this day. So I did exactly what my biological father did to me, as I did that to my kids. Next slide, Liz. In 2006, Governor Brad Henry, he is my favorite governor politician by far. He signed my parole papers. He signed my parole and allowed me to leave the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. Now, let's backtrack just a little bit on this one. All throughout my early years, I went to college. I did all of that, but I was a bohemian. I was a professional student because I never stayed in one field of study long enough to get a degree. I actually got locked up with about a little over 100 hours of college credit, not in one specific field. So I just went to school, got the grant, and went party, went back, was in graphic design and art for a while. Then I went to accounting. Then I was a business major. So when I had my honest conversation with God, I thought, okay, I'm going to have to buckle down. In 2008, I received my bachelor's degree. Now, when I talk about this, this is not bragging. This is just how things have changed when we become honest with ourselves and we become focused, and we don't just live selfishly with what I want to do. In 2010, I married Shauna. You saw her pictures a slide back. In 2011, I earned my master's degree from Cameron University. In 2012, I became a licensed alcohol and drug counselor with the state of Oklahoma. In 2016, I was invited to sit on the board of directors for the Oklahoma Drug and Alcohol Professional Counselors Association. I am current board president of that organization right now. And just here recently, I was appointed by Governor Kevin Stitt to the LADC board. So that's how things come full circle. Now, I've been out of prison 16 years. I've done more in this 16 years professionally, personally, parenting with my children and grandchildren than I did my whole 38 years prior to getting arrested. Next slide, please, Liz. The young man you saw at the beginning, Aaron, he was 13 when I got locked up. That's our first picture after our reunion. Now, mind you, I was only locked up 5.5 years. So when I got locked up, he was 13. He was 18 when I got out. I tried to make contact with him and I tried to, I'm doing okay. You want to get together and visit? And he's going like, no, Dad, no, that's okay. No, not right now. There was always an excuse. So I didn't see him. He's 26 in that picture right there. So I have a 13-year gap that I did not get to be with my oldest. And I still do not have a relationship with his youngest. And these are some pictures of, this one on the right is Denver. Just this year we were at Denver March together. Last slide, Liz. Now let's base this all and move it forward into parenting. These 4 young ladies on the left, and I showed this picture during our last presentation, they gave me the opportunity to be a father once again and be the father that I knew I could be. And the 2 twins, they were in the 1st grade when we married, and they're about 17 right there. They're 21 now, and everybody's going to have grandbabies except my biological on the right. And, you can't always get what you want, but if you try, sometimes you get what you need. I didn't want a 15-year sentence for trafficking in illegal drugs, but that's what I needed to get my attention and to focus and be the father, parent, grandparent, husband, son I could be. And with that, that's my slide, and I'll turn it over to Listina. Thank you.
Good afternoon again, everybody. So I am going to be sharing my screen here with everybody. So I started off my story from way back when, I want to say I'm going back to like the 1860s. But first of all, I'm going to start off with telling you about my immediate family, like my parents today. My mother grew up in a boarding school, and she talks about the extreme poverty that she experienced there and how she was only allowed to have 1 dress during her school year. And then my dad, he really wasn't around, so I really didn't know too much about him, but I do know that he dropped out in middle school. And both of my parents are full-blooded Native Americans. And then this next slide here is of my great distant ancestors. These are Dakota leaders, Chief Big Eagle and Little Crow. And I want to kind of focus on Little Crow today because when he was alive and when he was like causing a lot of wars or a lot of fighting for people's rights, he was like murdered by the US government. And in the process of him being murdered, he had 5 wives before that. And when he was discovered to be like the leader who was causing all the ruckus up in Minnesota, they sought out to kill him and kill off all of his descendants. And out of those descendants and out of those people was my grandma Lizzie. And that's her in this picture, the older lady holding the baby. And you guys can't see the lower part of the picture, but she actually has a pair of moccasins on. And for me, that's valuable because she was alive in a time where there was a lot of colonization going on and a lot of Eurocentric values that were being imposed upon her generation. And then this is also her in the picture with the cross around her neck, and she is holding my grandma Margaret. And these are some of the oldest pictures in my family on my mom's side that I could find. And I wanted to show them just to show like the involvement that we went through, and also to illustrate how some of the things within us were lost. Like with my grandma Lizzie, she was a traditional healer and she knew how to go out into the fields and she knew how to harvest different medicines. And there's stories of people coming to her and seeking these medicines, and she would go and get those for her, for these people. And then I really believe that during that time, there was like shame that was injected into our people for being Native American and for speaking their language, wearing their clothes, or doing those practices. So I think that that's where like the fear and the shame and that need to survive was probably the highest in our generations. We lost our identity, our language, we were forcefully forgotten. And I want to say our cultural pride was taken in every generation since then. Our healthy sense of self-esteem was lost, and that affected our family values. What I know now today about our traditional Dakota family values was that everything was very cohesive and that parenting was done within a kinship system and everybody was related and everybody helped out. And I just want to illustrate that to show like how far we've come and how far we've gotten away from that really loving traditional family value system. And then I also want to point on the boarding school era too, because my mom went through a boarding school for most of her life, and her mom was in the orphanage for most of her life too. And when my grandma went through the Tekawitha orphanage, the nuns were raising her and they didn't show her any love or anything. So when she came home, my mom spoke about how she was not affectionate with them. Like she didn't give them hugs and she didn't really tell them affectionate things like we tell our kids these days. And that affected my mom. And my mom tried her best to do that because she said as a kid, she always wondered why her mom wasn't hugging her or her mom wasn't like showing them affection. And so now in hindsight, my mom can look back and see that it was probably because of what happened to her at the orphanage and how she was parented and how she wasn't told that it was okay to show emotions or told that, hey, yeah, you do need nurturing, you do need hugs, you deserve hugs. So she stayed distant, but she also managed to give birth to 10 children, and my mom was the oldest of them. And out of those 10, some have passed now, and some passed as children, but my mom is still alive. So then when my mom raised us kids, there was 8 of us, she had her own issues with alcoholism. So what she showed us is different than who she is today. I just want to make that clear too. Like, even though my mom had her own cycle of stuff to go through and she has to do her own healing, she did manage to keep all of us kids under one roof, even though like we witnessed alcoholism, violence, and there was other abuses that existed in our household. And then there was the cycle of poverty that was also continued through those generations. Then my father, he was there like for maybe a handful of times until I turned 6. And then from age 6 until now, I've probably seen him a handful of times again. And then my mom's alcoholism was off and on until I was about 16 years old. And my father, I used to always wonder, why isn't he around, or why doesn't he come see me, or why do these other kids at school talk about their dad? And when they ask me about my dad, like, I don't know what to say. And I would come home and I would tell these things to my mom, and she would tell me to lie and say, yeah, just tell them your dad's a truck driver and he's on the road and he hasn't came back to see you yet. So I believe I did that a few times. But a bad thing about that was that it was teaching me to lie, and it was teaching me to be dishonest. And in hindsight, like I think I would have deserved to know the truth, but for some reason my mom just always like covered up for my dad. And fast forward to present day, my dad is currently homeless. I've probably seen him maybe 2 times in the last 20 years. And he is a former heroin addict, and he's also on a methadone program. And so I've never really felt a healthy male love from a father figure in my life. And as the presenter before me was saying, you know, we need those things in order to be healthy ourselves. So I feel like that's something that was lost in my generation. And I've always wondered, you know, what does that feel like? Or what would it have been like if my dad was there? Like if he was there for me to run to, or, you know, just to have a healthy male role model. But I didn't get that. But I do have an older brother who I used to follow around a lot, and he's been kind of like, if I had to say like a healthy role model, it would be him. And I just want to also say that, like with my mom, some of the traits that she was teaching me as a kid were traits of somebody who is living like an active alcoholic life, like the lying, the stealing, stuff like that. Like I would see those behaviors and I would be asked to partake in those behaviors as a child. So when I grew up into my adult life, I experienced a lot of negative consequences because of those behaviors that I developed as a kid that continued over. But my story isn't over yet. And in the next week's presentation, I will get into more about my experiences. But I do just want to say that in conclusion, that no matter, you know, what my ancestors went to, they found a way to survive. You know, if it weren't for my grandma Lizzie surviving as a kid, coming down that boat, you know, we wouldn't even be here today. Like there would have been generations of us gone, but we have a purpose and we're here today. And I hope that you all enjoyed my tidbit of a story. Next presenter. Raquel.
Hello, let me get my slide up. Okay, can you see my slide? All right, thank you. Okay, so last week I gave a brief overview of the boarding schools. And today I will connect how boarding schools affected how I was parented and some history behind my family. So when I think of how boarding schools affected how I was parented and how that parenting was passed down from generation after generation in my family, as in many Native families, I am going to take you on a journey. Ha, Madaweka, Nanietsa, Raquel Ramos, Nutse, Numana in Cuban. Hi, my name is Raquel Ramos, and I am half Comanche and half Cuban. So my great-great-grandfather was Quanah Parker, also known as the last chief of Comanches. Quanah had 7 wives. My family comes from his wife, my great-great-grandmother, Choni. Quanah transitioned from life on the land of the Indian way of life to a colonized life of the white man. Quanah and Choni had several sons, one named Baldwin, who married Nora, they're not pictured. And in the top right are my grandparents, Roy and Alice. My great-great-grandfather was Louis Wallenberg and Uella Martin. They had a son named Gustav, who married Virginia, and Gustav and Virginia had a son named Gustavo, who married my grandmother, Raquel, who I'm named after. So whenever I think of my grandparents, of course, I have to look at 2 sides. When I think of my Native American grandparents, my memory growing up whenever I was 12 years old and older, I cannot remember one time that my Native American grandparents ever spoke to me, although I would see them. I can't remember any time that my Native American grandparents ever hugged me. And there was definitely never in my entire life, and I love you. And then whenever I think of my Cuban grandparents, when I think of my Cuban grandparents, on the bottom, Raquel by herself, and then my grandfather, those are my people in Mita. And I just have so many memories of my Cuban grandparents. I remember all the loves, I remember the hugs, I remember the family weekends, I remember the holidays together. I remember absolutely everything as a child when it came to my grandmother and grandfather. So here's my mom. as a baby and my dad as a little boy. The first picture is a picture of my mom as a baby, along with her mom and a friend. And the bottom picture is that of my dad with his mom and his dad and his sibling. Can you notice the difference? My mother and her friend versus my mom and my dad and his my Aunt Carrie. You know, you notice the family unit. And sad to say, I have a lot of pictures of my Cuban grandparents, and this picture and the picture I showed you of my grandmother and grandfather that were my mom and dad's parents, I hardly have any at all. I don't know if there's any of any other than these of them growing up or not, but this is just what I remember and what I have. And these are my parents. My parents were married and they had 3 children, myself and my 2 brothers. And this may seem like a happy family right now. I was born in New York City. I know, New York City, what? And you're Comanche, what? But and I like to talk through laughter. So, you know, I was born in New York City, and you know, it was good. It was good to what I could remember. But there came a point in my life that I don't remember a lot when it came to my mother. And it was through years down the road after my mother had passed back in 2009 that my oldest brother brought to revelation that there were 10 years of my life that my mother wasn't with us. And that's where I can attribute the trauma of boarding school that followed my mom out of Comanche country up to New York City. So generational trauma is unresolved trauma and shame genetically inherited from your mother or father through epigenetic inheritance. It surfaces as disempowering feelings and behaviors that make no sense in the context of life of the person experiencing them. As happy as my family was in the previous picture, like others who faced the norm of grandparents raising grandchildren, my beautiful mother's ability to parent was clouded by boarding school traumas. Sorry. And left us for 10 years. I'm sorry. Okay. And left us for 10 years of my early childhood. And here's the why. Today, as an adult, I understand the why of how I was parented by my mama and how historical trauma and boarding school era affected her. My mom did not receive the nurturing that a child needs. She spent most of her life being raised by my Aunt Joanne, or her Aunt Joanne. She had no sense of belonging growing up. And on the other hand, my dad always had his parents. Even though they were divorced, they still lived as a family. My dad's family comes from Cuba directly. My dad was born in Havana. My mother was born here in the United States. But even though my grandparents came as immigrants, they still stayed within that family unit, and my mother didn't experience that. And so when we look back at the impact of boarding school era, let us look back at my precious mama, and me as a child. She, like many parents, fit into most of these categories. She was not taught how to be a mother, just like most Native women in the boarding school era. And even in some certain areas, this is still prevalent due to the impact of the boarding schools and generational trauma our mothers and fathers experienced. This type of trauma in most cases has led to dysfunction that exists in Native families of today in areas of substance use, mental health, and suicide. With those that may suffer from generational trauma, most do not know how to express their feelings and emotions, which leads to the lack of parental skills, experience, and knowledge. However, at the age of 11, my brothers and I were reunited with my beautiful mom. Through the love and hugs poured into my brother and I from our Cuban side of the family, my mother, through our experience of being hugged and loved from my Cuban family, she was able to learn to be loving, caring, kind, compassionate, hardworking survivor whose goal was to watch us succeed in life. My mom believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and I'll go into further of my story at our next session. But I could see now how the boarding schools and how historical trauma shaped and molded the parenting skills of my mom. Was it her fault? Absolutely not. Did I know this during the time? Absolutely not. Do I know this today? Yes. And do I know that there can be change? Absolutely. But was it enough? My mom coming into my life again whenever I was 11 years old, was it enough? And did it come in time? You know, I did not go to boarding school, but I and my parenting skills and knowledge were also affected by how I was parented. I think that there are many simulations of how I was parented by my mom and how I parented my children. I wasn't in their life most of the time. And so that is one of the things that I'll be sharing next week is my journey personally as a parent. But I think that being able to give you the history of my mom, of my family, and of the two connections of how I was raised, how it impacted me. So I want to leave you with this quote. Being a mother or a father is learning about strengths you didn't know you had and dealing with fears you didn't know existed. And I truly believe that this is something that my mother and I have lived through. And I can't wait to next week to show you how we overcame this. I'm going to pass it to Miss Cynthia.
Hello, everyone. I am going to open my screen and share here. Okay, so as I go through here, let me just, okay. I hope you guys can all see that. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so parent to parent, real talk from Real Thrivers, the cycle of parenting. Let me click. Okay, so my name is Cynthia Goslin. I was born in Topeka, Kansas. My father is Evan Goslin and my mother is Rosemary Cashman. Here's a picture of my mother, father, myself, and my brother. I'm an enrolled member of the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas. I am also Muskogee Creek. I have 2 siblings from my father, and I have 1 sibling from my mom. I have 3 biological children, and more recently, I'm taking care of my nephew. So kind of going back in history, if you look on the left side of the screen, that is my paternal grandma, Rachel Hawkins Goslin. She is full-blooded Muskogee Creek, and she lived in Oklahoma. She was born in December 18th, 1929, and her mother, and to kind of give you a little backstory, I started doing a lot of research on my family. And what I found specifically in this situation was there wasn't that much information. When I was going back, this is my great grandmother over here on the right, Julia. I don't have as much information on her. I know that she was Muskogee Creek as well. All I have and all my family has is this picture here, and then we have her death certificate as well. What I've been told about my grandmother when she was growing up is that she attended a boarding school. I'm not sure which boarding school she did attend. I can't find any record. I couldn't even find the record of her death, and I was alive when she had passed. She actually passed a day before my birthday when I was 9 years old. So she does have siblings. I'm not sure how many. And I'll kind of get into that a little more as I go through. Here's my grandfather. This is my dad's father. His name is Maurice Goslin. They called him Mo. He was born in Kansas. His father was Hillary Goslin and Flora Cadu. She then took the name Goslin. He attended boarding school, but I'm not sure which one either. When I reached out to my family, my aunt specifically told me that that's something that they just didn't talk about. That's something that affected not only him, but affected my father and his siblings as well, which is carried on onto me and on further as well. My grandpa, I remember when I was younger, I took an interest in our culture. He was described as being a very hard man. He did not give people hugs. He did not say, I love you. He did not do those other things that other people experience that I've heard about. He married my grandma in June of 1950. They were both 21 at that time. He did pass away in 2015. I remember talking to my grandpa one time, and he was telling me a story about the boarding school. And I never seen my grandfather emotional, but he got emotional when he was talking about that. He shared that he had been hurt while he was at school, and that he didn't know our language anymore. He had some documentation, but all that has kind of been lost through the family. Here is another picture that I have. The yellow line shows to Flora Cadu Goslin. That is my grandpa's mother. And those are all her siblings. So kind of getting into the relationship with my father, Evan. He was born in Kansas, and you got to see his parents. So these are two completely different photos that I have to show you today. A big reason why I have these two different photos is to kind of show you the different aspects of parenting that my parents gave me as I was growing up. Like I said, my grandfather was hard and didn't show much affection, didn't show many emotions. And my father was similar in that way. One thing that we did share is drinking alcohol and partying and doing drugs. And that's exactly what we did. I seen that was a coping mechanism that my family used, and it's definitely something that I carried on and I used as well. So the picture on the left, this is my father and I. We were at one of our family owned bars, and we were drinking. There was a ton of family there. The picture on the right is me and my father. This was taken last year at the powwow. So our relationship has changed quite a bit. And he is the youngest of 5 children. Here's another picture of my family. This is my dad, his brother, and then his 2 sisters. And this is a more recent picture. This picture here is my grandfather, my dad, and my uncle. My grandfather had a drywall business that he built for the family, and this is his house, and I have a lot of memories in this house. Switching gears over to my maternal side, this is my grandma, Irene Castro. Her father was Leonard Castro, and it's believed that he had come from Mexico, that he was from the Kickapoo tribe of Mexico. And then her mother was Minnie Sasquatch Masqua Castro. So she married a few people and took on the names as she went. She's the oldest of 9 children. What my mom has told me is that she did go through the boarding school. She had to raise her siblings when my great grandma had passed away, which there was 9 children. She was an enrolled member of the Kickapoo tribe of Kansas. She's a very special person in my life. She passed away in 2010, and this is a picture of her and my son. This is another picture to kind of show you, this was kind of the life. Twilighters was something that is ingrained in me. It's a bar in Topeka, Kansas. And my grandma, even when I was young, probably about 9, I'm not too sure, I was really young, my grandma would have me drive her down the street to the bar because she was only like 4 blocks away, and she would be drunk before we left, and she would go there and she would drink even more. So this was her hangout spot. My grandma did go through the boarding school, and I have that right there. I don't have any documentation. It's something that I definitely want to look more into. But it really changed her as well. From what my mom has told me, she was very abusive physically. She was very cold, is how she described it. She didn't show much emotion, and she suppressed her feelings with alcoholism. Here's my mom. Her name is Rosemary. She was born in January of '67. Her father is Alton Cashman and Irene Cashman. Those 2 pictures are me and my mom when we were partying. I was very young. I think that's the picture on the bottom is my mom and I when we were partying. I was probably about 17 in that picture. And then there's a picture in the middle of my mom and I, and we have a really good relationship now. But we definitely went through it. This is a picture that my uncle took with my mom of his kids. So these are my cousins here, and this is just kind of the norm. I know it's explicit, but I do want to show you the realities of what I had seen as a child growing up. They had thought this was funny because this is something that they were doing. As you can see, there is drugs on the plate. There is a liquor bottle that the child has. So this was something typically that I seen as I was growing up. This is a picture of my mom when she was younger. And then my maternal grandfather's name is John Cashman. I don't have too much information on him. I do remember him. His family had owned land on the Kickapoo Reservation, and they had hired tribal members as he was going. And then he passed away in 2006. And I see a hand up.
I'm just letting you know you're at time.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. It's actually the last slide. So thank you guys for listening to my story. And I look forward to sharing more with you as we go. And with that, I will pass it to Melanie.
All right, I'm going to attempt to share again this week. So here I go. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we are
Okay.
seeing your presentation. Yeah.
All righty, let me, in the beginning. All right, I'm gonna think that you can see my screen. So I'm just gonna,
Melanie?
yes,
It's doing what it did last week. It's not actually showing your PowerPoint presentation. It's showing your notes page as well.
okay, hold on. Let me stop share and try again.
There you go. You're good.
Okay. Hopefully I can navigate through this. So I'm going to talk a little bit from last week about the panel looking at our history and looking at the events and looking at the ways that they impacted and shaped not just everyone's family life here, but just how our past impacted our ancestors and how we were raised and how it continues to impact our children today. So I did the honors of making a family tree for myself, and as I was going through this process, there was a slide in PowerPoint that you can use, and I was just dropping pictures into it. And as I spent time collecting the family photos and putting everything in front of me, you know, an image of strength and survival and resilience began to emerge. And I started to see this family tree as a healing process for me. My mother, to the left there, she told me she didn't like that picture, but I thought it was a really cool picture of her, and I went ahead and used it anyway. And as I was going through this process, you know, I was lucky enough to find pictures of my maternal side more so than my dad's side. So I feel blessed that I still have both my parents. My mother recently turned 75, and my dad will be 81 on his next birthday. But I also wanted to acknowledge my grandparents, my paternal grandmothers, who were relocated from forced assimilation from Iowa and Kansas, and then ultimately to Oklahoma. Our tribe is from the Lake Huron and Lake Michigan area, and we are Sac and Fox, two distinct tribes. In Sauk, we are called the Thaki, or Yellow Earth people. On my paternal side, they're from Michoacan, Mexico, on my paternal grandfather's side, and they're an indigenous tribe in Mexico. And then on my grandmother's side, she was from Santa Rosa, Mexico. So who were my parents as children? As I was trying to talk with both my parents and talk about their childhoods and sort of what they went through, I know that my mother was raised by her grandmother, and she was given away when she was a baby, but later I learned that she was rescued and raised by her grandmother until she passed. My father was raised by his mother and later went to a Catholic military boarding school. And as I, you know, asked both of them about their childhoods, you know, it was just it wasn't a hard conversation to have, but it was like missing pieces of information that we just have never talked about. And, you know, I really didn't realize that my dad had gone to a military style boarding school. You know, it was looked at more of a prestigious thing. But my father tells me that when he went his first day, he was 14 years old. It was a Catholic military boarding school. And he said the first day he got there, he was slapped by one of the priests because he was late. And so I thought to myself how a 14-year-old boy, you know, is supposed to feel like a sense of belonging to anything. You know, he did have his mother raising him, but it just dawned on me that as much as I was looking on my native side of boarding school trauma, my dad had also suffered boarding school trauma in a different way. So here's my parents as they got a little bit older. My dad graduated from that military school and went on into the Army. My mother, she's a little bit older in this picture, and you know, they were together for a short time. I don't have a lot of information about what happened, but you know, I just began to wonder what happened to them as they became parents, and how did their worlds fall apart as parents. So I started looking at the map, or the image that we talked about last week about what broke apart our collectively. I shared historical information about how alcohol and other substances poisoned and weakened our families. In our family, we didn't escape the abuse of substances, mostly alcohol with my grandparents, and then opioids and marijuana later became prevalent, and even later other substances were introduced to the younger generation in my family. All of these fragmented pieces affected my family in some way or the other. So, you know, we talked about the tree last week, and we're looking at it more of a positive, but I look at this because I see all these things that happened in the family. And, you know, the stories that we've heard already, we've all sort of experienced those roots of addictions and that shame, and then the tree of addictions. So we all share that trauma together, And so as we move forward, next week we can talk a little bit more about my parenting and how that affected me. But I wanted to share this this photo. It's one of the more happier photos that I see. I can tell that in this photo, in the my early childhood, I'm probably around there somewhere, but the brokenness in our family began to unravel when I was probably around 2 or 3 that I know of. And during my childhood and through my early 20s, I began to feel that cumulative emotional and psychological wounding that spread across my family. I saw my mother struggle with emotional traumas, depression, substance abuse, and domestic violence in her relationships. And, this photo, see assimilation had already happened and how we had already lost our cultural connection. Now, my dad had his share of struggles, as I mentioned earlier, but he did have the help of his mother to help him parent. I looked at my dad, who grew up in this military-style boarding school, had types of emotional trauma in his childhood. And on my Mexican side of the family, they had more connections to the church and mostly other family members. The family dynamics felt different, but were generally the same when it came to brokenness. But my aunts, who are in this photo here, my dad wasn't born yet, they were really strong women, and I was able to be around them for a short time, and they were a very positive influence in my life. And so I thank them for being those strong women that I probably needed to be around in order to get where I am at today. This is a photo of my dad and his mother. My dad didn't grow up with his father. His father had died of tuberculosis, but he was a heavy drinker, from what I understand, and he was very abusive to my grandmother. And so, he didn't get to witness that, but I think that he had heard a lot about, they were really poor back then, and I think that they really showed strength in the way that they were raised, and the way that my grandmother, she just had this resiliency that was unstoppable, and she was able to help raise me and my brother. So growing up in a small non-native community in central Kansas, I was raised by my paternal grandmother, who was in her 70s at the time. And my older brother and I were disconnected from our 2 older brothers in this picture. So there's me, my brother here to the left, is a 32. Him and I, we share the same father. And so we were raised together. And the 2 in the middle, they had a father from a previous relationship from my mother's first marriage. So we were disconnected. And both of my older brothers spent time in boarding school in Concha, Oklahoma. And then they were sent away to live with other family members on my mother's side. And then the other oldest one lived with their family on their father's side. And we all grew up knowing about each other, but we never grew up together in the same household after our parents divorced. What I will say about this photo is, the photo itself, to me, I sort of remember this day, but like Raquel was saying earlier, there's some parts of my childhood that I just don't remember. And maybe I blocked them out, I don't know, but I know that, as we got to this point, a lot of things had already happened by this point. But those were the years that made us, and deconstructing this was a journey for me. One of the things that I'll talk about next week is that this is the beginning of my healing tree. Next week I'll share about my parenting journey. I'll make the connections from my past to my present and to my future, where it'll help me see how far I've come and how the life cycle as a baby, a youth, adult, and elder are clearer to me. So these are my 2 daughters, and I will share out next week, but I call it my healing tree. And I hope to work on this week and show different ways that I was able to heal through some of the traumas that, that my family suffered individually, but collectively we all feel it. We all feel it when our family members suffer. So this week, I just want to remind everyone, as we have listened and learned this week, that you are a descendant of your strongest ancestor, or ancestors. And, you know, we talk about these things that we don't always talk about, but to know that we were able to survive and that we keep on going is important as parents. And we have to model that behavior, and we have to model that strength, as hard as it is sometimes. So I just want to leave that message with all of you, and just to know that you are the strongest descendant of your ancestors. So Kadepi, thank you.
Okay, everyone, go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm going to talk just a little bit. I know I shared a lot of my more historical pieces last week, but I just want to talk a little bit more about my grandparents. And as we're going to this place of parenting and what I learned from them, and not only the good things, but those things that were associated with assimilation and colonization and some of these barriers that came down into my family. Well, my grandmother's on my mother's side, Ella and Chester Morgan, they're right there pictured, and my grandmother in her traditional outfit, and my grandfather standing beside her in his cowboy hat. These two people played a prominent role in my life. On the picture to the left, my mother, you see here, she's got her little necklace on and her big hair. And then my uncle is to the very right, and then my grandmother, and then my aunts in the middle, who were also very key when we were together all the time. There I am standing with my aunt, and then my two little sisters are there at the bottom. My grandparents were very key when my dad wasn't around a lot, so they were always there for my mother at times, but we always had this really strong sense from my maternal grandparents. There was always coming together. And my grandfather's down below. We're celebrating a birthday. I'm to the very right. My little sister Toy, and then Linda's in his lap, and he was a goofy guy. He was always messing around and playing with us. And then to the right there with my grandfather in the middle, I'm on the very right, and then a good friend of mine's Picola when we played basketball. My grandfather was very prominent in my life. He was always there when we needed him. He passed away in 2011, and then in 2014, my grandmother passed away. But they were very key in my life. Next slide. And this is my paternal grandmother on my dad's side. And, you know, I shared the picture last week of my dad in the center there in that right picture, and my grandmother's on the very back. And then my grandfather is also pictured there. And the sad reality in this is, even though my dad was in my life in the beginning, he had a tendency, and I don't know why, he hid us for the longest time. And my grandmother didn't even know she had granddaughters. And eventually we got to meet our grandmother, Mary Warito. But my grandmother was a very traditional woman. She didn't know any English. She really didn't go to school. But I can tell you that her Navajo ways, and she was Nashushidanen, her clan, she was one who taught us more of the traditional things. You know, we learned how to herd sheep, butchering a sheep, also taking care of her cows, and I mentioned her gardens. She had during the land transition, during the whole allotment era, what was amazing about the Navajos is they were able to section land. And so my grandfather to this day has over 500 acres of land up in the Farmington area, which my dad inherited when he died. So there's all, and it's one of these things where you realize the vitalness of land. But my grandmother was one that always showed us that the land was important. And she, at one moment, was almost Christianized, but she went to churches. She did all of those things just to open her mind to it, but she was still very traditional. Next slide. So this is where my mom, this is my mother. And I just want to reiterate the clans. And even though we were separated so much, my mom went to boarding school, and the picture to the very left down below is her graduation picture in 1962. She was 18 years old at that time. Which was really odd is how my father stepped into the picture. My father was a policeman, and he was 10 years older than her. But my grandparents would let him stay in the house in Crown Point, New Mexico. And eventually he caught my mother. My mother was very beautiful. So it was one of the things where he would take her to school and all of those things, but she never knew that one day they would come together. But they did when she was 19, and I don't know how many dates they went on, but eventually she got pregnant. And then I was born. That's her and I up on the top. I was born in 1963. So I'm telling you how old I am. I'll be 60 in March of next year. But then my mother was just a really young mother. And by the time she turned 25, a year apart, my sister was born, Linda. And then we had my other little sister, Carmen, who was born about 3 years after me. And then my little sister, Toy, there sitting by my mom with her big hair, she was born 4 years later. But eventually my parents would divorce. And then my mother remarried in 1979. And my brother, who's pictured in this very big picture with the black t-shirt and the glasses, was born in 79. So he's my half brother. But there are my sisters as we got older. And so my mom had 3 girls, and with my father, and then my brother, Sean, with her next husband, Albert. But Albert was very key also as we have gotten older to become that father that was not in our lives for the longest time. Next slide. So then my dad, there's a few slides about him, and the picture to the left is his family. And then that's what I showed with his mother. But the picture to the right up on top where you see my dad, my mom, and there's me standing there, my 2 sisters, that is the only photo I have of my dad with the family. Other than that, I can tell you my dad was never around. The stories I hear when my mom was pregnant and gave birth, she was always searching for my dad. My dad was a police officer for the Navajo Nation when in his younger years and when we were small kids. But he was gone quite a bit. But when he was home, he took us to places. We were hiking, and he taught us so much about the land and food, how to grow it. Animals were very present in our house, but it was through my father. And he was just one who just really shared. There's a picture of him and I there. He is now 88 years old. And I'm very glad he is alive, but we have a very distant relationship because he remarried after he divorced my mother to a very, I don't want to stepmother, but she was also very cruel. Her and I don't get along, and she's been very mean toward me in a way. And I know some of you, when you go through these reorganizations or remarriages, the parents or the stepmothers and stepfathers are not nice to the kids that are still in those families. Next slide. So this is me. And I just wanted to share that, you know, what was really hard in my life, I was the oldest child of my 2 younger sisters. And this middle photo, you see my mom up on top to the right. And then that middle photo, when I'm a little there with the little chopped bangs and my other sister, well, there's my little sister Carmen in the middle. And she died of crib death at 6 months old. So she never made it into life, but she has played a very prominent piece in my life as I've spiritually have grown. There I am with my 3 sisters at the bottom. There's a photo of my dad, and there's a picture of my grandfather. And there's this one picture on top. Oftentimes I've always felt like I was alone. I don't know if it was because just of the way I just had this really spiritual connection to everything. And I recall when I was little at 4 years old, my little sister's funeral, and seeing her when she died during crib death, and my mom trying to to ease everything, trying to find my father, but he was never around. And it was just one of those things where I felt like I took on a lot of the responsibilities of my dad, because when my parents divorced, when I was 11, that's when I realized, as the oldest, what I had to do, especially for my mother, because my dad, domestic violence was huge. And my dad, when he would start drinking, would really abuse my mother. And that's when I had to help her so many times, sleep with her, protect her. There were times my dad would pull out the gun, a shovel. He would do all these things, but I was the one that would get in between that and stop him from doing it. I was a very tall kid, and I initially am 5'11" and a half, so I was almost 6 feet tall. And it was also one of these things when I think in this photo down below with my dad, I was like in 3rd grade. And I was already growing pretty tall, and that was one of my virtues. Next slide. So this is my house in Crown Point, New Mexico. And the violence, not only in that house, but there were good things. My mother played the piano, and she always played music. And she would always open the window there when she would turn on the sprinkler, and water would come in, and then we would hear her playing music. The mesa in the back is where I went often when the violence was in our house, and when I would hear the screaming and the shouting. That mesa was my security. It was my place to take me away, to realize and pray and talk to the animals that were there, the lizards. But that was my solitude whenever I was going through these really hard times. But there were some great things in all of it as I have moved forward in what I've been doing with my life. But the parenting, because both of my parents went to boarding school, my mother didn't communicate very well, but the one thing she taught us, especially in this house, was how to clean. She had the spick and span house, and my kids know her, and her perfume is bleach. So they would laugh and say, Grandma Cindy always smells like bleach. But that was her trademark. And then playing the piano and her music, because when she went to high school and when my parents divorced, my mom was always working, and she could never really be involved in our schoolwork or especially in my games and playing sports, but my grandparents were there. And I never realized that vitalness of it. I always thought I was missing my father, till I went through my own healing and realized how my grandfather was there and my other family members. And that is one of the sense we get when we're in our native homes, is that there are those individuals who just are there. Next slide. So this is how I was parented, and I talked a little bit about that. So just, look at that question and look at your own life and how you were parented. And I know that being the oldest of the girls, there was a lot of comparisons, and I was literally left on my own. So when my dad left, I was in sports. I ran, I did all of these things to be academically 4.0 student, and got involved and played sports and went on to college and did all of those things. But my sisters had it rough because of this comparison. My mom would always do. But then I was also the one that was involved in a lot of the violence to protect my sisters from what was going on. Next slide. So we'll talk a little bit more about this. So as I looked at these traumas, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later when we go into the activity. But so I took traumas and started to look at my great grandmother walked the long walk of the Navajos. If you look at the last slides from last week, 1918, my grandfather, mother, and grandfather both went through the great influenza, and then my mother through boarding school. But each of these occurrences within history created this, the long walk, separation of family, abandonment. The child, my great grandmother had become an adult because she had no more siblings, the loss of culture, but also the spiritual death and what that did. The great influenza, they were both orphans because they lost all their family because of the great influenza. There were abandonment issues. And this is where alcoholism started with my grandfather. My grandfather and grandmother would fight now and then, and there was depression that was starting to surface. But Christianity was a big influence in both of my grandfather and grandmother's lives, and that was the road they walked. But anyway, so these were the things that were going on. And in 1949, with my mom's boarding school issues, it got even more deeper. And next slide. Now, these traumas, how would they be passed on to me is what I'll talk a little bit more next week, and my children. But then also the big question for me was, how will I parent as I move forward? Next slide. I don't think there's any next slide. Okay, you don't need that. You can close it. So now we're going to talk about this activity, and we're going to reflect back on what you have heard through all the various stories and what you are feeling and what's coming to the surface right now, you know, regarding your own families and traumas. So we're going to, what issues have these sessions brought to surface? Because when we talked about that tree last week, and I talked about how this pulling out of the roots of where you belong, and then through relocation, through all of these things, and initially as you're relocated and having to plant yourself in these lands you never knew about. Now the growth, and maybe there's no growth, in what that did to your family. And then as these trees are growing, and the trauma that has been created from these atrocities, whether it's the long walk, whether it's relocation, whether, there's all of these things that occurred based on the laws and the policies of this nation. And so we want to take a look at this as we're going to go into these breakouts. And I really want you to focus on these two questions. Reflect back on what you have heard, what feelings are coming to the surface, and then also regarding your own family, traumas, and what issues have this session brought to the surface. Okay, so are we going to do that right now, Liz?
Yes, so if you can all be patient with me, I am going to be assigning the breakout rooms. Each of you will be assigned to a breakout room with one of the panelists. And you will get to talk to them about how you're feeling, how they're feeling, and any questions that you might have for them. And once we get that set up, I will let you all know, and then you will receive a notification that will say, please go to this breakout room. And from there, we can get started. So how long we're going to be there? Sorry, I tripped over my words. Each of you are going to be in the breakout rooms for about 12, 13 minutes. And then we will call you all back. So it's just going to take a second for me to get everybody in there.
Somebody's microphone.
Ronaldo.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can hear you. She was in your breakout room and she was unable to unmute because she couldn't click the *67, but she wanted to thank everybody for sharing their stories. And feel free to finish your train of thought. You're now back on so that we can hear you, Val.
Oh, yes. I just want to say thank you again, and thank you for sharing your stories in my group. Thank you for asking me to share mine. I'm definitely part of that generational trauma. My grandparents fluently speak Cherokee, but however, they did not pass it down to my mom or their brothers and sisters due to the trauma they experienced and their parents experienced through the removal. So it's just something that's not talked about. So I really appreciate everyone's openness and vulnerability to share those stories that we seem to share. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And with that, I think that's a great transition into our other activity, which is we're doing a word cloud activity. So you can either take out your phone and scan the QR code, or you can go to this link, or go to menti.com and type in the code number. And what we're doing is we're reflecting on the two questions we asked you in the breakout rooms, just so that everybody else from other groups can kind of see how you reacted. And so once people go to this link, as well as go to the code or the QR code, we'll switch to the PowerPoint slides from Mentimeter so you can see what other people are feeling and what's going on for them. So I'm going to give everybody a moment to scan and everything. You guys are amazing. Everybody's reacting, like responding so quickly. I'm watching the word cloud change already.
Yay.
But I'm going to give everybody one more minute just to scan or go to the link, and then I'll switch. With that, I'm going to switch what I am sharing.
All right. Let's do this. Oh.
And as you all respond, it's going to continue growing and changing. And because in the middle are the largest responses, so resilience and hope and strength continue to grow bigger and bigger with every response. And there's all these other aspects of feelings that you're feeling with each of these things. And thank you all for responding. I'm going to give everybody a little bit longer to respond.
We can't see the cloud being made. You had it up for a second.
Oh.
Oh, I can see it.
Can you see it now?
I can see it.
Oh, well, hang on. Very cool.
No, it's good. I'm glad you said something because I wanted to make sure that everybody could see it.
Oh, I see it now. I had it on a different view. Okay.
Oh, good.
And you know, guys, I hope what we get out of this is, even though, you know, that we've been in our little silos and all of the pain we've been through, but now you're seeing all the similarities in the stories that have been given of this pain. And so with that, you're not alone. And so I think, as also with the whole boarding school and all of these things are opening up, there is going to be this place for healing. But because of who we are and what we've already been through, we can do this. Because and I hope our stories show you the resilience of what we've done, because we've been through some very traumatic experiences. But I also know we've all been through it the same way. So there is that common ground, but I do know that those who are oppressed by their oppressors are the ones that are going to have to teach the oppressors what they've been through. So as we go through the healing piece, may your voice be strong enough to not only be where we are in speaking out and being vulnerable, but it's also to cast the healing line out there for everyone who listens. And that's what I hope you guys, it looks like you're receiving it. So it's very good to see this.
Yeah, I want to note that because with this, the more responses you get, the bigger the words are.
Yeah.
So what I'm seeing is resilience, strength, healing, and forgiveness. And I think those are all definitely needed on our healing journey. And I'm so glad that I'm seeing so many, especially on the forgiveness piece. We have to forgive our parents for what they've done. They did what they did because that's all they knew. It is not their fault. And part of our healing journey is to forgive. So I'm glad that I saw that. Thank you.
Thank you all for your responses. And I think we've kind of stopped at people's responses. So I'm going to go to the next slide, which is our other question of regarding your own family and traumas. What issues have this session brought to the surface? And it's the same link and same responses. So this will have little blurbs of conversation rather than the word cloud adjusting, just know that every single one of your responses are anonymous. And so if you are bringing up anything personal to you, it is not associated with your name in your responses.
Grounding myself is important. Yep. And these issues and family traumas just come from this moment. It's not about so far in the past, but just what are you feeling at this moment? Wow. Yep, and layers. Historic analysis. Breaking generational curses. I'm impressed, guys. I'm impressed. So there's a few of them here, healing that occurs in layers and that it's a long life process, breaking generational curses, abuse toward my mom and dad, siblings, alcohol and drugs, hurt feelings and shame I had for so long. Honesty with my own story brings trust with my son and students I work with. And somebody also said, release those tears, feeling hopeful for the future. Forgiveness, suicide, depression, grief, and loss, how much I have overcome this far and the person I want to be. There's the resiliency, guys. There's the resiliency in each and every one of these comments. I want my children to know how beautiful and loved they are. I want my parents to know that I'm sad for the lack of love they had and it wasn't their fault. I pray they forgive themselves and learn to love. Yeah, that's the other key thing. Your parents, and they're carrying a lot. When they realize, I know my dad right now for being 88 years old, and the life he's lived. And now I think he's going through dementia. So it's one of these things to where he was very cruel. And now I don't know how he is now because I need to go visit him, but we've been very distant. Today, I want to be the parent I needed for my children and grandchildren. Forgiveness and healing. Wow. Thank you guys for sharing. This is amazing.
I really appreciate all of your responses because I think it's an opportunity for you to see how much power the stories that you tell have and the stories that you tell your children and your friends and your peers. And so I really appreciate everyone who shared not only in the breakout rooms, but also on the word cloud and also as a panelist. So thank you all for being willing to speak or write in today's session.
Wow.
I just wanted to add something here from an educator point of view. At the National Indian Education Association, we serve a lot of students across the nation, and part of this is helpful to us as well on how to help parents that have difficulties with their children in the school system. And so I think this fills that gap of education, and it also helps us as parents work together so that we can help each other get back to being a support system for our children, because I think we've lost that connection to do that. And I also wanted to shout out to the dads out there that are raising their children. My dad raised me for the most part, and my grandmother, but I want to give acknowledgement to those fathers out there who are raising young ones to be strong men and women.
And with that, I think that's a great closing to our word cloud, and I'm going to switch back to our closing slides, and then we will open up to questions. Before you all leave us, make sure you please do the GIPRA and all of the other technical speak. So we will be posting these recordings on the Native Center for Behavioral Health website, as well as on our website, which I sent in the chat earlier, which I can send again. Our next sessions it's next Friday and the following Friday. So the next one is looking inward. So it's more of the personal stories. And we hope that you're prepared to listen and also prepared to be open with yourself, because all of our panelists will be telling their story very close to their hearts. And then our September 30th session is Breaking the Cycle, which is talking about forgiveness, as well as forgiving yourself and future steps forward. Like, what strategies can you use? What can you do to make a change if you haven't yet? And with that, any questions or comments? And I will stop sharing and we'll stop the recording as well.